Four of Discs is called Power, and this is all about that physical world that we have created, of which will have within it things of which mean something to us, and we want to protect them and keep them close to us. We can see that on the Rider-Waite version of the card, and yet this perhaps shows something of a little more negativity to the card. He's attempting to hold on to these things above all else. He is literally clothed in his possessions, sitting around an empty town, perhaps showing an element of loneliness in trying to keep these things to him. The Thoth card doesn't necessarily go down that actual angle. This shows us something of which I think is actually very human, and therefore this card can be very relatable to a lot of people of whom draw it. In fact, on the Tree of Life we are in Chesed, of which is often translated as loving kindness, and so we can see that those things that we want to wear and keep close to ourselves are actually things that we love. It may also be, of course, the love and mercy of a deity, God, given to humanity, and so those things, those physical things, are still divine. They don't necessarily mean anything less, simply because they are material and not purely spiritual. And we see this error made all the time in New Age and certain religious movements where they say, give up all your possessions and don't owe anything and get rid of the ego completely. What you're going to be there is extremely unhappy, because you are living in a physical world. There are physical things that you want to pick up and hold, and that feel nice and that you love and are drawn to, and you shouldn't be putting them aside to try and achieve some nirvana, of which is actually all about balance when it comes down to it. And so you have to have a balance of the two things going on. Astrologically, we are the sun in Capricorn, and so Capricorn is very physically focused and very grounded, and so the Capricorn element here would be knowing how to actually build this castle of which we have on the card, knowing how to actually put the bricks one on top of another so that the castle would actually be built. And the sun is giving it the energy to do so, it's giving it the inspiration. And so the sun in astrology in general is very powerful and very dynamic, and so we have that power element carried all the way through that element of the sun. And so if you wanted to build this castle, you would have to have the will to do it. It's no good just having the bricks and the cement and a blueprint, because you wouldn't be able to build it. You have to have the will to do it and the intention to actually see it built. The symbolism of this card is very material, however. You'll notice that there are 4 towers upon this card, and within all of them is an elemental figure, and yet there is the 5th element missing, and so there is no spirit, although we may still see an echo of it later on. For all intents and purposes, though, we do see air, water, fire and earth, and of course that represents the physical world. This castle is very much in that physical world. It's also a closed structure, and so it's stable, it's not going to fall down, and so it shows that everything in there is complete. More metaphysically, you could say that the elements have actually come together to form this physical structure, and so it's a bit of a symbol of the actual structure of anything around us. The air element is the power of the intellect and the mind to draw out the plan to see it built. The water is the emotion that comes through with wanting it to mean something. It doesn't just want to be a physical object, it has a meaning to it. The fire is the spiritual energy that we've put into it, because in order for it to mean something, it has to have a spiritual foundation in the first place, even if it's interpreted in a materialistic way. The fact that we are able to relate to something and love it or hate it, or it feels nice to wear or whatever it may be, still has a spiritual foundation to it, for it interacts with our consciousness. And then the earth element to finish off this stable number 4 would of course be the physical benefits of it, so our physical well-being of which we get from having this physical object, whatever it may be. And that physical object here on the card is a castle, of which of course is a fortified structure. It's literally designed to keep things out and to keep things in. And so it's protective and it's defensive. The castle here represents us and our world around us. And so if you're watching this, in your living room now and you look around you and there's all those things and family photos and items and things that you've bought and that you like, that's your castle. That's your world or form that you have created through your intent and will and all of those energies around you. And you want to protect those things. That's why you lock the doors at night. You don't want people coming in and taking them because they mean something to you when it comes down to it. And this is evident on the castle itself, in that around the four corners are encased in a square 6 towered crenulations or castellated walls. The number 6 is the number of the sun and returns us to the astrological associations here, in that we've known how to build this or buy it or whatever it may be because of the energy of the sun inspiring us and giving us the will to do it. The will is also shown here on the drawbridge, and so the drawbridge is the only way in or out of the castle, and it can be lowered or raised based entirely on the instructions of the people of whom dwell there. And this represents the fact that we do have a complete control over what we let into our lives and what we give in our lives. And so essentially we have the power to accept or reject anything that comes up to the gate of our world. We don't have to let in thoughts or ideas or beliefs of which are going to sabotage those things around us. We can raise our drawbridge. And yet, of course, if we so choose, we can also lower the drawbridge and allow things in, or allow us to give, allow us to come out of the castle, to give charitably, for example, which returns us to the idea of chesed, repairing the world, the process of the correct morals and all this type of thing. And yet when it comes down to it, if we let something into our castle and then they destroy the things around us, even though it's a nasty and horrible thing to happen, we made the decision to lower that drawbridge. Because at the end of that bridge, you will see, is actually the gate of which leads out into the wider world, of where both good and bad things dwell, metaphorically. It's also pointing downwards in the direction of Malkuth, if we were looking at this on the Tree of Life, and so it's pointing towards the world of the kingdom, the physical world. And upon this road is also the glyph of Capricorn, and so this shows that this card is very much centred in the physical world, and that we are to step into that world to empower ourselves. This is where we find our success or our failure, all based on that will. And so it's essentially saying that we have to learn about that world, like we see on the wider Fool's Journey of the Tarot. We have to not give our power away, like in the well-known song The Gambler, of where you know where to hold them and when to fold them, and you also know when to walk away and when to run. You need to raise your drawbridge, even if it results in the shouting and swearing of those on the other side of whom want to come in. You don't want to give too much of your own power away. Here the chesed, or charity, really does begin at home, which is another very famous saying that you could relate to this. And we do see this through life. You see, often when people do have a house and a home or a family to look after, their priorities change, and so they no longer want to spend money recklessly, for example, or do things of which may put that world of which they have built into danger, and the things of which dwell inside that castle, their family and their possessions, are in many ways the actual bricks that build up the foundation of their actual world. Now, quite importantly here, the castle as well is also surrounded by a moat, and if we look on the top part of the card, we can see the glyph of the sun, of which leads in the opposite direction to the drawbridge. So this leads up back towards Kether and the sun, and yet this isn't actually accessible at all. You could only get in or out of the castle through the drawbridge. The moat here would actually stop you from getting towards the actual sun. The moat is said to represent our boundaries, And so as far as the castle is concerned, it shows where it begins and ends. And so in life we find those boundaries, we know what we stand for and what we won't allow. And it's different here to what it was on a card like, say, the Princess of Swords, where she was fiercely defending her identity, and yet she'd already changed her identity multiple times, and so it was prone to change anyway. This is something which is much more solid, and the castle, in theory, would live for hundreds of years. Castle ruins still stand, we can still go around them, they are very solid. And so this shows that our boundaries here are fixed, we are more mature, we understand more about our lives, and we want to hold it and keep it. And yet, because this moat cuts off the path to the sun, it shows that it can become quite dry, the world, and quite colourless if we haven't allowed that spiritual foundation in. And so the card actually looks quite desert-like in some ways. It's actually quite barren, the landscape on it. And so as well as this finding of boundaries, we have to be careful not to shut out the light, so to speak. And so, because that element of spirit is missing and can't get in, life could, if we're not careful, end up like the Rider-Waite card, where he's just grabbing onto all these physical things, but perhaps the meaning is lost. In order to find the true meaning, the light has to shine on them. It has to be truly shown there. And so, the card can be a very good one in many regards. It can show that, of course, you yearn for that material security. You have a good foundation of life and family and possessions, and you want to, of course, keep them. You want them to be there always for you. It can show that this has been built because of your wise investments and choices and lessons through life. And yet it also gives us a lesson, and that is that we have to have that spiritual foundation. We have to let that light in. And so a good metaphor for this is, it's no good having huge, great big expensive TVs in every room of the house if there's nothing for you to watch on them. The TV itself is just a box. It's what you tune it into and decide to watch upon it, of which gives you meaning and emotion and connect all of those elements together to create the will to do and build the world of which you see around you. Therefore bringing us to that united balance of which we began this video with, of where we enjoy and love those physical things, and they in themselves inspire our divine will to grow and expand upon the universe, while also keeping our world and our own castle close to our hearts.